2024 was a roller coaster of a year for Tesla. After a dismal first quarter, which saw declining revenue and shrinking margins, shares got a huge surge of momentum after a Donald Trump election victory in November. As CEO Elon Musk looks to play a prominent role in the incoming administration. As investors gear up for full self-driving deployments and new product announcements, is Tesla stock primed to be a top performer in 2025? Joining me to talk Tesla stock is Dan Ives, Managing Director and Senior Equity Research Analyst of Technology at Wedbush Securities. So, Dan, what kind of year is it looking like for the EV giant?
It's a champagne moment right now. I mean, look, I think if it comes down to it, you saw really a tough year to start for Tesla. But I believe, and I talked about it, that was just the beginning of its next phase of growth. And I think margin stabilized, delivery stabilized, and then the bet for the ages, Musk bet on Trump. I mean, that was the dynamic changer. And I think it is now going to be a golden age for autonomous and AI when it comes to Tesla. And that's why a lot of the bears, while they're sitting there in hibernation mode, they can't find AI in those spreadsheets.
And I want to just talk about deliveries for a minute because Elon Musk said on the Q3 earnings call that vehicle sales could grow between 20 and 30% in 2025. So, how does Tesla get there? And do you see demand supporting that?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of that's China. I mean, China headwinds were there, price cuts were happening. Now you've seen price cuts stabilize, margins stabilize. And I think China growth could be up above that number. And look, the broader story now is I'd say deliveries is probably 10 to 15% of the story. The story now is it's laying the groundwork for that stabilization, but then the gold at the end of the rainbow, what I believe is worth $1 trillion alone, is autonomous.
You say autonomous is worth that valuation, but what is Tesla worth excluding self-driving robots, AI?
Yeah, look, I think combined, we're looking at probably what's going to be a $2 trillion market cap, and that's probably conservative. I mean, look, I could argue you start to factor in Optimus, especially in the sweep the leg environment that we're seeing in the Beltway, deregulatory for autonomous, for AI innovation. I mean, you could start to look at something that could be, what I believe 3 trillion, when we look at the next few years.
And when we look at the product roadmap for 2025, what's on your radar? I know investors have been waiting for an affordable model to be unveiled, but what does that roadmap look like in next year?
Yeah, you're not going to get like a true call it $25,000 car. I do believe first half of the year that we have a sub $30,000 car, could be a little more. And that's important because that's mass demand, how you're going to drive it. We're not talking about a next gen vehicle, but it's very important in terms of this broader Tesla story to have new vehicles, that could actually move the needle. I think that's something that happens in the first half of 2025.
And just looking more at the Cybertruck, because it seems to have run through a huge reservation list, but without a lot of massive orders. So, what's your outlook for that specific model next year?
Yeah, and look, and that's become a cachet, right? I mean, you pull up to a valet and that, everyone sort of stops. And I think it speaks to just the broader Tesla brand. Look, Cybertruck is not going to be mass market, but it's part of this broader build out that we're seeing both on the high end as well as on the more affordable. From a technology perspective, that continues to really be, I think, a shining star moment for Tesla. And look, go back a few years ago, the bears, the skeptics said Cybertruck would never even be on the road. Now I could argue if you're driving, especially East Coast, West Coast, I mean, you see a Cybertruck probably every 20 minutes.
So, Dan, you were at that robotaxi reveal event in October 2024. Can you talk a little bit about the ramp up of CyberCab and full self driving and what that timeline might look like?
I think especially with Musk and Trump and that bromance, I think evolving in a great way. I think it's going to accelerate FSD and autonomy. It's going to accelerate a lot of the things they talked about. Now remember, coming out of there, a lot of the bears, negatives, they didn't see anything. And I talked about it. I think it was a top 3 event that I've ever been to in 25 years covering tech. Because Okay, it lacks details, but the technology speaks for itself. And I believe CyberCab by early 2026, that's something that's a reality. And I think when we look at FSD, I think FSD, if I look at version 13, everything we've seen, we could have massive FSD penetration over the next year.
And if Tesla doesn't achieve full self-driving next year, how will that affect your bullish stance?
I think it's more getting toward level 4 and ultimately what would be level 5. Like, I think if they hit speed bumps getting there, and there's always speed bumps, there's always going to be issues getting there, but that ultimately, I'd be surprised, very surprised, if we're not looking at true autonomous 2 years from now. Like, I believe if you have a 10-year-old, you could argue that when they get their driver's license, what autonomous will look like, call it 6, 7 years from now. I mean, I believe 20% of all ride shares are going to be autonomous.
You mentioned the bromance between Elon Musk and Donald Trump and what a big bet that was. And it seems like you've called this Trump administration a game changer for Tesla. So, can you talk about how that incoming administration might impact Tesla in the future?
Well, first off, I mean, a lot of the sort of Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th individuals, Khan at the FTC, done. If you go through from a regulatory perspective, I think a lot of the spider web is going to be, I think significantly depleted. And that's a positive, especially when it comes to autonomous, what I will view on NHTSA. Musk is going to clearly have tentacles across a lot of agencies. The biggest thing is you need an autonomous regulatory roadmap to be introduced from a federal perspective. I think that is, if you ask me going to next year, that's probably one of the most important things that we need to see, not just for Tesla, but for Waymo and for others.
And is there any concern about, I know Trump's talked a lot of tariffs. Is that as much of a concern? Or I think there was even maybe some speculation that Elon serving in government might be a bad thing for Tesla. But are there any other headwinds from the new presidency that might affect Tesla?
Yeah, look, tariffs, I mean, China is such a key market. Clearly, that creates definitely, some issues, but I believe that you're going to have carve outs for Tesla, carve outs for Apple, carve outs for Nvidia. I think Bart's going to be worse than Buy. I also think Musk is going to be heavily involved in the China tariff discussions. No one understands Beijing and President Xi better than Musk. 10% politician, 90% CEO. And look, and that's why you look at a lot of the bears, they hate this at 50 billion, despise it at 200 billion, at a trillion, just yelling from the top of the buildings, and at 2 trillion, I think when they're with their spreadsheets in their caves, and they'll be doing the same thing.
And you've mentioned the importance of China. And I think when we spoke to you last year, you called it the heart and lungs of the Tesla strategy. So, can you talk about how that market is shaping up in 2025 and any potential headwinds or tailwinds there?
Tailwinds. I mean, think about it. You had some headwinds from I mean, if you go back to a year ago when we were at CS together, like Tesla went through like that tough sort of 4 to 6 month period. But it's what they needed to do. They needed to cut prices, focus on demand, margins got hit. They kind of navigated that storm. And then on the other side, look where they are. So I think China now is a tailwind from a demand perspective.
So, then just to wrap this all up, what do you think investors should be thinking about Tesla stock in 2025?
Look, I mean, we continue to view overall in AI. It's 10 p.m. at the AI party. It was 9 p.m. to begin the year. And this party goes on to 4 a.m. Now, in that sort of, you're going to have situations where a DJ stops playing music, there's glass on the dance floor, maybe people hear sirens, think cops are coming. But the reality is now Tesla, Musk, they're behind the velvet ropes. They're in the party. Autonomous and I think is 80% of the valuation that's going to be driven over the next year. Stabilization in China. And I think this is kind of the next stage of this Tesla growth story playing out.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for your insights today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.